We're learning today the Gemara on Daf Yud Amud Aleph from Masechta Sukkah. We're about 8-9 lines down from the top of the Amud. The beginning of the line is Kamash Malon. The Gemara is talking about the halacha that it said in the Mishnah that Ha'isa Sukkah Tachas HaSukkah is possible. And the reason is, as we learned out from the Pasuk Basukkah's Teishvu, that you can't have Shnei Schachim. You can't have schach under other schach. It's possible, according to the Tanakama. The Gemara will soon explain Shittas Rav Yehuda. So now the Gemara is going to discuss this, and let's begin. Kamo Yehei ben Sukkah l'Sukkah. How much space should there be between the top Sukkah and the bottom Sukkah that this will be an issue? So as Rashi says, the Gemara wants to know, obviously if you have two layers of schach and they're right one on top of the other, it's not really considered to be Shnei Schachim. It's not two distinct levels of schach. The question is, when is it an issue that the top sukkah is one level of schach and the bottom sukkah is a different level of schach, and then it's going to be puzzle. V'tehei atachtain psula. Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna says, tefach. If there's a space of one tefach between the two layers of schach, it's counted as two different schachim, and it'll be puzzle. What's the source of the shiur of a tefach? Shekei matzinu ba'al tume tefach. As we find regarding an oil, that there's tumah inside the oil, that the shiur there is a tefach. We had this before in the Gemara here, and the Gemara brings again a braisa. Tanya, we learned in a braisa, or it's actually a mishnah, the Tnan, tefach, al tefach, berum, tefach. If you have a space in the oil, under a roof, that's the height of a tefach, the width of a tefach, so there maybe is a tumah. So if there's a piece of a dead body inside, so that the tumah spreads around and is metame anything that's under that space of the oil, under that roof. And also, it also separates from anything that's outside of the oil that will not become tameh. But that's only if it has a space of a tefach. If the space inside this oil is less than a tefach, loy mevi, so then the tumah does not spread around in that area. Only if you touch it do you become tameh. And also, v'loy chaitzitz, it doesn't separate from anything that's outside. It's not considered to be a distinct space that's an oil separated, and therefore whatever's outside will become tummy as well, if it's on top of it or so on. So therefore from here we learn out that the space of a tefach is able to create a separation for an oil, so too over here the space of a tefach is enough to create a separation of the two levels of the schach, that it's shnei schachin and it's possible. Rav Chisda v'Rabba bar Avuna Omri, Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Avuna, they say a different shiur. Arba. In order for the two levels of schach to be two distinct levels of schach, it's only if there's a space of 4 tfachim in between. Why? Because we don't find a space that's less than 4 by 4 tfachim to be significant enough that it should be considered a domain for itself. As Rashi brings from Hilchos Shabbos regarding a Rishus HaYachid and regarding Carmelis, all these Rishusin is only if it has the minimum space of 4 by 4 tfachim. Tosfos brings that you also find regarding height, regarding an opening between one chutzner and another chutzner, that only if it's an opening of 4 tfachim does it connected to. So therefore over here as well, it's not enough to have a tefach in between, that the two layers of schach are distinct and separate, but you have to have a significant space in between of 4 tfachim for them to be two separate schachim for it to be possible. Shmuel, my third opinion, Shmuel says, Asara, that the top sukkah is only considered to be a separate schach of sukkah, which will make the bottom one possible if there's 10 tfachim in between. Why 10 tfachim? My time of the Shmuel, kech sheira, kach psula. Just like in order to be machshir a sukkah, the minimum space of a sukkah is the height of 10 tfachim. So too, in order to passel the sukkah, that the top schach is separate schach of a separate sukkah that's above the lower sukkah, it's only if that sukkah has a minimum height of 10 tfachim. That's the shit of Shmuel. Only then do you have 2 schachim of 2 sukkahs. If it's less than 10 tfachim, it's not another sukkah. So now the Gemara will ask a question on Shmuel from the Mishnah. Tanan. So we learned in our Mishnah, there's the second opinion, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda remain the Yurim Bel Yoina. If there's nobody that's living in the top sukkah, then the bottom sukkah is kosher. So the Gemara first wants to know, what's the simple pshat in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? My ain't the Yurin. What does it mean that no one's living in the top sukkah? If you're going to say the pshat is as it sounds, literally, that there's nobody that's actually living there in the top sukkah, so why does that matter? Otu di Yurin kagarmi? Whether someone is living there or not living there, is that even a factor? That doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is, are there 2 schachin? If there's 2 schachin, it's an issue. If there's no two schach, and it's no issue. And Rabbi Yehuda should agree to that. We learned from the pasuk, Basukkah's Teishu, it has to be one schach. So why does it matter if someone's actually living in the top sukkah or not? So rather, what's the pshat in what Rabbi Yehuda said? My ein diyurin. What does it mean? When there's nobody living there, kol she'einu ru'uya ledira. If the top sukkah is not fit to be living there. That's what it means. When is that? V'heichi dami, the legavaya asara. If the schach of the top sukkah, there's no space under it of 10 tfachim. And that nobody could live there. As we learned before in the Gemara, a sukkah that's less than 10 tfachim, it's not only that it's missing the minimum height because of a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but it's also a dira srucha. You can't live there. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda meant, that if it doesn't have the height of 10 tfachim, so then the lower sukkah will be kosher. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. So now Miklal, from this we can understand Tana Kama Sovar, that the Tana Kama holds that even if the top sukkah does not have that height of 10 tfachim and it's not a place that people can live, nevertheless psula. It's still an issue of a double layer of schach, and it's possible. So what do we see over here? That Adarabah, the whole point of the Tana Kama to say is even less than 10 tfachim, it's still going to be possible because of shnei schachim. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says if it's less than 10 tfachim, it's kosher. So this is a question on Shmuel. So the Gemara explains, Ki asar Rav Dimi Omri Omar, he said, Omri b'marov. They said in Eretz Yisrael. What does it mean in the Mishnah? That it may not tachtayna yechaylo. You know what it means when it says that nobody could live in the top sukkah? It means something else. It doesn't mean that it's too short, that it doesn't have the height of 10 tfachim. What it means is, if the schach, which is the roof of the lowest sukkah, is not stable enough, is not sturdy enough, that you can't place a pillow and blankets on top of it, then the lowest sukkah will be kosher. So as Rashi explains, that this is really based on the same point that Shmuel said before, that the top sukkah is only considered to be a problem, that you have schach, extra schach from another sukkah, if the top sukkah is a kosher sukkah. It's a place that you could live in. And when is that? If the floor of the top sukkah, which is the roof of the bottom sukkah, is strong enough that you could put a pillow and blanket there, so then the top sukkah, you could live in it. So that's a kosher sukkah. It's a kosher sukkah. So because it's a kosher sukkah, therefore it also passes the lower sukkah. So this itself is also based on the same logic that Shmuel said. So if so, the Gemara immediately asks, so what is the answer? We didn't really answer anything. So Miklal, if so, if Rav Yehuda says that the only reason why the bottom sukkah is possible is because the top sukkah is a kosher sukkah, because you could put it's sturdy enough to be able to live there. So if so, what does this mean? The Tana Kama Sovar. The Tana Kama holds even if the floor of the top sukkah, which is the roof of the bottom sukkah, is not strong enough for somebody to live there, psula, the bottom sukkah is still possible. So in other words, the question of the Gemara still remains. The rule that Shmuel said, kach sheira, kach psula, is not true according to the Tana Kama. The top sukkah can't be used because it's a case where you can't put your pillow and blankets there, it's not sturdy enough, and according to the Tana Kama, the top sukkah still passes the bottom sukkah. So if so, the same thing should be regarding the height. That Shmuel said only if he has the minimum height of 10 tfachim, then it passes the bottom sukkah, but I see that the top sukkah does not have to be a kosher sukkah in order to passel the bottom sukkah. So it's still a question on the opinion of Shmuel. So the Gemara answers, no. Ikke beinayu. Really, everybody holds, like Shmuel said, that the rule is, in order for the top sukkah, that extra schach of the top sukkah, to make the bottom sukkah possible, it's only if the top sukkah is a kosher sukkah. And that includes two details. It has to be the right height of 10 tfachim, and it has to be sturdy enough to be able to live there. However, in this itself, there's a machlekes of the Tana Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. As the Gemara now explains, Ikke beinayu, the difference between them of what the Tana Kama and Rabbi Yehuda are arguing about, the yechayla lekabel al yedei atchak, when the floor, the roof, the floor of the top sukkah, which is the roof of the bottom sukkah, could have somebody living there with difficulty. It's not so sturdy, you could be afraid that it might collapse, and someone could live there with difficulty. So in such a case, that's where the machlokes is. The Tana Kama says, al yedei atchak, you could live there, so it's kosher sukkah, so it's going to passel the bottom sukkah, like Shmuel's rule, kach sheira kach psula. Rabbi Yehuda says that since you could only live there al yedei atchak, it's not a kosher sukkah, it's not going to passel the sukkah that's below it. That's the pshat and the machlokes. But everybody, it would fit with Shmuel's rule. Zog the Mishnah, Piris Oleh Sadin. If someone spread a sheet on top of the schach of the sukkah, mipnei achama, because of the sun. So what is this Mishnah talking about? So there's two pshatim here in this Mishnah. According to Rashi, we're talking about a sukkah that has kosher schach, and it has enough schach, tzilosam, rubim, achamasa, more shade than sun. And then on top of that, he spread out a sheet. And the problem with the sheet is, it's a beged. A beged is makabel tumah, and therefore it's pasal schach. That's the issue. That's Rashi's pshat. Or he spread out this sheet below the sukkah, below the schach of the sukkah, that is, mipnei nishar, because of the twigs and branches that are falling into the sukkah and falling into your food, so he spreads it out to stop them from falling down. So as the Mishnah will say, both of these are pasal. Pasal is schach, either on top of yischach or under yischach, so therefore it's pasal. Tosfos has a different shot. What we're talking about over here is that the schach of the sukkah is chamasa merubah mitzilasa. You have kosher schach, but not enough amount. And therefore, you're combining the shade of this sheet that you put together with the kosher schach, and therefore, as we learned before, if you have kosher schach combining with pasal schach, it's going to be a problem, unless it's mixed together. But over here, it's on top of it, and you're combining kosher schach with pasal schach, and therefore it's an issue. Tosfos actually says an interesting pshat from Rabbeinu Tam, when the Mishnah says mipnei achama, what it means is, right now the schach that you have on the sukkah is tzilasam rubim achamasa. It's shady enough. But if you're going to allow the sun to bake on the schach of your sukkah, it's going to dry it up, and it's going to become chamasa merubah mitzilasa. So he doesn't want that to happen. So he puts the sheet on top of the schach, so it shouldn't get the heat from the sun, and it should remain silasa merubah mechamasa. And Tosfos says that the pshat in the Mishnah is that itself is an issue. Even though now it's totally tzilasa merubah mechamasa, but the very fact that you're using the sheet to prevent it of becoming chamasa merubah mitzilasa, which means that otherwise it would become chamasa merubah mitzilasa and it would be pasal, so that is mitztarif to make it pasal. That's the pshat in the Mishnah according to Rabbeinu Tam and Tosfos. Mishnah continues, another case, Oishe Pires al gabe akinif, or he spread out on top of a kinif, which is a bed that has 4 poles on the 4 corners, and you spread out a sheet on top of it to cover the bed. So also it's psula. So the 2 cases before, where you put the sadin above the schach or under the schach, or now on top of the bed, it's going to be pasal. As Rashi explains, this case of al gabe akinov is pasal for a different reason, not because of pasal is schach, but it's pasal because there's an oil that's inside of the sukkah. He's supposed to be sitting inside the sukkah, but over here this person is sitting under this kinef that he places the sheet on top of it. He's inside of oil in another tent which is inside the sukkah. He's not inside a sukkah b'chlal. That's the issue here. Avol, however, says the Mishnah, you can spread out a sheet on top of the poles, which are called naklite amitas. As Rashi explains, there are 2 poles on 2 sides of the bed, and you spread out a sheet that comes down like in a V shape, and therefore there's no roof of a tefach, so it's not an oil for itself. An oil has to have the minimum space of a tefach of a roof, and you don't have that here, so therefore it's not an oil that's inside your sukkah, so therefore you're inside the sukkah. Sagt die Gemara, Rav Chisda said, Lo yishanu ela mipnei nishar. This that it says in the Mishnah, that if you spread out a sheet on the yischach, that it's an issue, only if you spread it out for the purpose to catch the twigs that are falling down from the schach. So then, it's a pasal schach that's there, and it's pasal. But if you spread out that schach just for the purpose, for beauty, then ksheda, then it's going to be kosher. So again, here there are 2 pshatim in this. Rashi's pshat is that if you spread it out for beauty, even though it's there and it's in the same exact position, if it would have been there for the catching the twigs, but the kavanah of the person of what he's putting it there matters. As Rashi here explains, if you're putting it to catch the twigs, so you're putting it as a covering. If he's putting it as a covering, it has the name schach. So it's pasal schach, and it makes the sukkah pasal. If your kavanah is just for decoration, Rashi says, ein shem schach alau. It doesn't have the name of schach. This is a tremendous chiddush here. Even though it's mamish in the same position, but because of your kavanah, it's not called schach b'chlal, it's called a decoration, and therefore there's no issue. Tosfos' pshat, according to the Rishonim, is that over here when it says limna oisa, it's ksheda, is because we're talking about a sukkah that has tzilas merubah mechamasa, has the adequate amount of schach for the sukkah. So adding the pasal schach there doesn't change it. Once it has the adequate amount of kosher schach, any other pasal schach that you put there is not combining to be machshered. So therefore it's not an issue. That's Tosfos' pshat. Zok the Gemara Pshita, isn't this Pashit? Why is this Pashit? I mean, according to Rashi, it's definitely a very big Chiddush. But the Gemara says it's Pashit mipnei neshar tanan. If the Mishnah clearly says that it's possible because you're putting it there for the purpose to catch the twigs that fall, so it says it clearly in the Mishnah that only then is it possible. So the Gemara explains, I would think that really, even if you put the sheet there for beauty's sake, it's also going to be possible. The only reason it said in the Mishnah, the Mishnah is just saying what's more common, that people put it there to catch the twigs. To use a sheet as a decoration is not a very common thing. So therefore, Kamash Malan, Rav Chisda came and said, no, the Mishnah said mipnei neshar dafke, but if you put it there for decoration, then it's not an issue. That's the pshat that Rav Chisda came to be mechadish here. Shall we say that we have a raya to what Rav Chisda said from the following brayse? Sichacha kel chasa. If you have the schach on the sukkah according to the halacha properly, and then v'itra b'kramin, and then he went and decorated the sukkah with kramin, which is curtains, b'sadinin, and decorational sheets, amatziyarin, v'talaba geizin, or he hung up walnuts, shkedim, almonds, afarsikin, peaches, rimaynim, pomegranates, parchile, anovim, the different branches from grapes, ataris shel shiboilin, or wreaths of stalks from wheat, Yeinais, oil, wine that is, shmanim, oil, saltais, flour, all these different things that he hung up for decorations. Halacha is, aser, le'estapik man, you're not allowed to have any anah of them during Sukkot, just like the rest of the things that become part of the Sukkah, and you can't have anah from it, and it's muktzeh during Sukkot, ad motzeh yontiv ha'achrin, until the Maitzai, the last day of Yontiv, which refers to Shmini Atzeres. And Taisus here explains, even though l'chayre Shmini Atzeres you don't sit in the sukkah, so why should it be muktzeh even on Shmini Atzeres? The reason is because we follow the time of Bein Hashmoshes. If you would have to eat in Bein Hashmoshes time, you would have to enter into the sukkah, and therefore even Bein Hashmoshes time you're still using the sukkah for the mitzvah, so therefore it remains muktzeh for the rest of Shmini Atzeres until Motzei Yom Tov Achron. Okay, but Rashi, however, says you can make a Tanai, as the Gemara here says, and Rashi explains. If you made a condition that, and Rashi explains, the condition is at the time of Bein Hashmoshes, when the first night of Sukkot comes in, and you say, Eini Beidel man, I don't want to separate from them, it shouldn't become muktzeh, then Akaylefi Tnai, you follow his Tnai, the kedusha is not chal on these decorations, and it remains usable, you can use it and then have a null from it during the entire Sukkot. So, why does the Gemara bring this? Because one of the first things it said in this brayse was sadinin amitziyarin, that he's putting these decorative the sheets in the sukkah, and it's okay, it's kosher. So this is a raya to what Rav Chisda said, that if you're putting a sheet for decoration, then it's not an issue. So the Gemara, it's no raya for me. Why? Because Dilma Menatzat, maybe in that brayse is not talking about putting the sheet under the schach, not to block the whole entire schach. He's putting it on the side, on the walls, to create a decoration. So therefore there's no raya from here to what Rav Chisda said. Itmer, we learned in the brayse on different halacha, but related over here to the decorations that you hang in a sukkah. No ye sukkah, the decorations in a sukkah, ein mematim besukkah. They do not minimize the height of the sukkah. And this is relevant in two cases. If it's a case of a sukkah that's above 20 amas and you have to minimize its height, so if you have decorations, it's not going to minimize the height. And the same thing also if it's too low of a sukkah because of the decorations. So we're not going to say that it becomes possible because the decorations are hanging lower and therefore it's possible. Right? Because the whole point of here is these decorations are not schach. As we explained before, if these decorations would be schach, then it would create a psul because these things are not kosher as schach. But the whole point is, as we said before, they're not kosher as chach. So if they're not kosher as chach, they do not create also the space. They don't change the space. It doesn't consider it to be lower than where the schach actually are. Sagt the Gemara, Ravashi, so Ravashi says, Uminatzad, but if the decorations that you hang on the walls, on the sides of the sukkah, mematin, that will minimize the space and the width of the sukkah. You have to have a minimum space of 7 by 7 tfachim, Roisha v'Ruba v'Shulchanai, and if you're putting in decorations that don't allow you Roisha v'Ruba v'Shulchanai, so for that, it's definitely going to be possible. Sagt the Gemara, another story here, related b'chlal to this whole halacha of putting things under the schach, and here in this case on top of the schach. Minyamin avde de Ravashi, Minyamin, the servant of Ravashi, Itmishale ketunte b'maya. He had a shirt that got very soaked with water. V'ishtatche ametalalte. So he spread out his shirt to dry on top of the schacha de sukkah. Amalei Ravashi said to him, Dalye, take it off. So people shouldn't say that you're making your schach here of this shirt, which is a garment, which is mekabel tumah. It looks like that it's there for the purpose of schach. So he answered Ravashi, don't people see that it's wet and I'm just putting it there to dry, not for the purpose of schach? So there's no marasai in there. So the Gemara answers, Ravashi said to him, I was telling you that when it'll be dry, then you have to take it off because it looks like you're leaving it there for schach. Or other Rishayim actually say, that's Rashi's pshat, other Rishayim say that what Ravashi told him is that it's a gzeira, that if you're going to leave it here now, so then people are going to come to say that it's dry, or when it's going to be dry, people are going to come to say that it's there for the purpose of schach. Sagt the Gemara, Itmer, we learned another machlokes about these decorations of the schach. So noye schach hamuflogin mimenar bo. So if you have decorations of the schach, a sheet or any other decoration, but here in this case, the decoration is removed from the schach 4 tfachim. So before the Gemara said that decorations do not create any it's not puzzle, it has no shem schach on it, as Rashi says, so therefore there's no psuler. It doesn't have a name schach, so it's not puzzle as schach. But that was decorations or a sheet that was put right under the schach. But over here, it's removed. It's removed 4 tfachim. So what happens now? Rav Nachman on Maksheira. Rav Nachman says it's still kosher. For the very same reason as we said before, it's put there for a decorative purpose. It's not puzzle as schach. Rav Chiste, Rabbi Baravona Amri B'sula. They say because it's removed, so therefore it's puzzle. As Rashi explains, because it's removed, so therefore it's considered to be like a separate entity. So now if you're under that decoration, it's like you're in a different oil. It serves like as a different, like you're in a tent for itself, not under the sukkah. So therefore it's going to be puzzle. The Gemara shares a story. Rav Chiste v'Rabbi Baravona iklu lebei Reish Galusa. Rav Chiste and Rabbi Baravona on Sukkot came to visit the Reish Galusa. Agninu Rav Nachman b'Sukkah, so Rav Nachman gave them a place to sleep in a sukkah. Shenoyeha muflogin mimena arba tfachim. Such a kind of sukkah that had decorations in it, and the decoration was removed from the schach 4 tfachim, and they were sleeping under those decorations. Now Rav Chiste and Rabbi Baravona considered that to be a pasal sukkah. It's like an oil for itself. Ishtiku, they were quiet, and they didn't say anything to Rav Nachman about this sukkah. Amalahu, so Rav Nachman said to them, Hadubu Rabbana Mishmatayu, did you Rabbana, both Rabbi and Rav Chiste and Rabbi Baravuna, did you have charata from your opinion about this matter, that it's considered to be like an oil for itself? Amrulei, so they answered him, Anan shluchim mitzvah anan. We're here to visit the Reish Galusa, and that's a mitzvah. As Rashi brings, it's a mitzvah to be mekabel pnei rabbi beregel, to come and greet your Rebbe on a yontif, and that's what we came here for. So we're here doing a mitzvah. U'piturim in a sukkah. So while we do one mitzvah, we're potter from a sukkah. So therefore, we weren't obligated to sit in the sukkah, so we didn't say anything to you. It seems almost like from the Gemara that Rav Nachman was trying to test them to see what's going to happen. He gave them dafka this kind of sukkah, but it turns out that they explained to him, no, we're potter, so therefore it's a whole different case. We're b'chlal not chayiv in the sukkah here. Taisvus here clarifies this whole thing of shluchim mitzvah pturim and a sukkah is only here if they would have to go and find themselves another sukkah, and because of that tircha to find another sukkah, it would prevent them of fulfilling the mitzvah that they were doing to be there to go and greet their Rebbe. But that's what the case was over here, and that's why they were potter. Whereas Rashi later in that sugya says it doesn't matter, even if it's not going to prevent you of doing the mitzvah you're doing now. If you're in the middle of doing a mitzvah, you're potter of having to go do another mitzvah. We'll see mitzvah in the sugya later on Daf Chafei. Sagt der Gemara weiter, Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Mutter lishon bekila besukkah. You're allowed to sleep in a kila inside a sukkah. A kila is a bed that is wrapped around with some kind of a net, and it's enclosed. You're allowed to sit with it, you sleep in it in a sukkah, gag, even though it has a roof. In other words, it has a tefach of a roof. It's not made like those nakliti amita that has a V-shaped roof. No, it has a roof. But you're allowed to sleep in it. So the Gemara right away says, that's only if the height of this roof, of this kilo, is not 10 tefachim high, so therefore it's not an oil for itself. Tashama, the Gemara brings a braisa, it said, Ayosham bekila besukkah leyotzi yedei chivasai. Clear braisa, if you sleep in a kilo on a sukkah, you're not yotzi yechiv, you're mitzvah of sukkah. So the Gemara answers, what is this Braisa talking about? There it is 10 tefachim high, so it's a oil for itself, and therefore you're not inside the sukkah. Meisvei, the Gemara asks from a different Mishnah, a person that sleeps under the bed inside the sukkah is not yotzei mitzvah. So you see again that you're sleeping under the bed, it's considered to be an oil for itself, so you're not yotzei. Why don't we say the same thing with tequila? So the Gemara answers, Shmuel explained that Mishnah, talking about a bed, that under the bed it has a height of 10 tefachim, and therefore that's the issue of sleeping under the bed. Toshima. Now let's come to our Mishnah that we just learned before and see a raya from our Mishnah. It said in the Mishnah, Oishe Pires al Gabe Kinoifis, that if a person spreads a sheet on top of the 4 poles above a bed, psula, so then it's possible. So what do we see over here? This seems to be the same thing as a kilo, that you have a sheet spread above a bed and it's going to be possible. So again, the Gemara gives the same answer. Hasam nami the gvi asara. There, those poles with 10 tefachim above the bed. That's b'chlal what we're talking about over here. When it says the shiur of 10 tefachim, it means 10 tefachim above the bed, and therefore over there it's an oil for itself, and it's going to be possible. Frek the Gemara. But in a Braisa we didn't learn this way. In other words, right here we'll see in a Braisa that we're speaking about a case where it's not 10 tefachim high. Why is that? The Tanya we learned in a Braisa, nakliten shnayim. What does naklite amita mean? Nakliten means that you only have 2 poles and the sheet is on top of the 2 poles. Kinoifis, what is kinoifis? Arba. That's when you have 4 poles. So piras agabi kinoifis. If you put the sheet, you spread it on top of the kinoifis, psula. Al gabi naklitin, if it's on the naklitin, then ksheira. Then it'll be kosher because it doesn't have the tefach on the top. But the Braisa says, ubulvat shalayu naklitin gvoyim in amita asara. But that's only if the naklitin, even by the 2 poles, it's not high above the bed, 10 tefachim. Okay, so what is this? So even regarding the naklitin, it's saying that what are we talking about? That it's going to be kosher by the naklitin? That it's not 10 tefachim high. The cloud, so from this we understand the kinoifis, when it comes to the kinoifis, which are the 4 poles, and we're saying that it's kosher, aval pisha ein gvoyin asara, that there it's going to be kosher, that there it's going to be puzzle, by the kinoifis it's going to be puzzle, even if the height of the kinoifis is not 10 tefachim high. If so, it's a question on what Shmuel said regarding the kilo, that he could sleep in a kilo because the whatever surrounds the kilo is not 10 tefachim high. But here we see from a Braisa, when you put the sheet on top of the poles of the kinoifis, it's not 10 tefachim high, and it's possible. So the Gemara answers, kinoifis is different than a kilo. Why? Shani kinoifis the kvi. The kinoifis, when it has poles that are affixed, they are kvi, they are affixed to the bed, and you put the sheet on top of that, that's something that's more permanent, and if you sleep under that, even if it's not 10 tefachim high, you're inside a separate tent, and you're not inside the sukkah. Therefore, that story, that case is different than the kilo. Frag the Gemara, but v'harei sukkah al gabi sukkah, going back to the psul of one sukkah that's below another sukkah. The kviyah, when it's built in a way, and you have the top sukkah, which is also, it's affixed, it's kavua, it's permanent. And what did Shmuel there say? That the only way the top sukkah would be kosher is if it was 10 tefachim high. So too the top sukkah only makes the bottom sukkah puzzle when it's 10 tefachim high. So what do I see? You do have to have the space of 10 tefachim to separate between the layer of the top sukkah and the layer of the bottom sukkah to be separated, to make it puzzle. So why shouldn't we say the same thing regarding the kinoifis, even though it's permanent? But in order for it to be considered a separate oil for itself, it should have to be 10 tefachim high. Just like you say by sukkah al gabi sukkah, that it's only if it's 10 tefachim high. So the Gemara answers, Omri, they said, it's a different thing. Hasam de lemifsal sukkah, there it's a top sukkah. The top sukkah is going to passel the bottom sukkah basara. There, that's only if the top sukkah is going to be full 10 tefachim high, then it makes the bottom sukkah puzzle. But the l'shavya oil over here, you have the kosher sukkah, and inside the sukkah you have an oil. The shavya oil, to consider what's inside the sukkah to be a space for itself as an oil, batzim asada nami hava. Even less than asara, even less than 10 tefachim, it's considered to be an oil for itself. You're not trying to passel anything. When you have a kosher sukkah, and then you want to passel that kosher sukkah by a top sukkah above of it, so that's something more powerful. You're trying to passel a kosher sukkah here. So then it's only if the top sukkah has the full height of 10 tefachim, it's a real separation from the bottom and top sukkah, then it passels it. But over here, you're not trying to passel the sukkah b'chlal. Inside this sukkah, which is kosher, you have another oil which you're inside of it, and therefore you're not inside the sukkah. And therefore you're not being yaitz the mitzvah. For that, even less than 10 tfachim, since the kinoifis are permanent, it's considered to be an oil for itself, and you're not yaitz the mitzvah. A related halacha to this kila, a person that's sleeping in a kila. Again, this is a bed that's surrounded, it has some kind of a net, and it's completely surrounded with some kind of a sheet, and you're not dressed. So it comes to the morning and you have to read Kriya Shema. So Rashi brings the pasuk Le'yirah b'cha ervas davar. When you say a davar shebikdusha, you're saying Kriya Shema, you have to be dressed. So this person is not dressed and he's in his bed inside his kila. Maitzi roishe chutz lekila, he can stick his head out of the kila, v'kaira Kriya Shema, and he could say Kriya Shema. So Rashi explains the chiddush here is, if you're in a house and you do the same thing, you stick your head out of the window and you say Kriya Shema, that's not going to work. Because over there, where most of your body is, it's considered to be that your head is there as well. So, but over here, what he's saying is, a kila is a different thing. Kila is almost considered to be like a garment. So just like when a person's wearing a garment, so your body is in your clothing and your head is sticking out and you say Kriya Shema. Kila is more fitted to the person, so therefore, you stick your head out, you can say Kriya Shema. Meisve, the Gemara asks from a Braisa where it says, "Ayasham bekila oret." You're sleeping in the kila and undressed. Lo yaitzi roishe chutz lekila v'yikra Kriya Shema. So there clearly says you should not do this. Stick out your head and then say Kriya Shema. So the Gemara answers again the distinction we had before. Over there, it's speaking about a kila that has the height of 10 tfachim. Therefore, over there, it's like you're in a house. It's a bigger space, and there you can't stick out your head and say Kriya Shema. And it's logical to teach that Braisa this way. Midiktani safe, because it says in the safe of that Braisa, what do we compare this case of the kila to? A person that's standing in a house undressed, he shouldn't stick his head out of the window and read Kriya Shema. So what do we see? That we're comparing the issue of that kila is that it's compared to a house. So just like in a house, the issue is it's not a garment, it's a big room, it's a house. And therefore over here, you can't just stick out your head. Similar, when it talks about a kila, we're not just talking about any kind of kila. If it's a kila that's very small, it will be considered to be like a garment. But if it's a larger kila that is, it has the space of 10 tfachim, then if you stick out your head, it's going to be similar to a house. Shema Mino, that's a raya for this distinction. But the Gemara now immediately clarifies regarding a house, that by a house itself, the halacha will remain the same, even if the house is less than 10 tfachim. Ubayis, but by a house, nami, someone not good is the word nami, afa pisha ein gevaya asara, even if it doesn't have the minimum height of 10 tfachim, kivin de kviyeh, but since it's a permanent structure, oilahu, it's an oil, it's a tent for itself, it's not a garment, it's an oil, deloi gara mikinoifis. And therefore, it's not less than kinoifis, meaning that in such a case it's a permanent place, and therefore if you stick your head out of it, you can't read Kriya Shema in this way. So by a bias, the halacha actually is that it has to be, does not have to be, that is 10 tfachim in order not to be allowed to say Kriya Shema by sticking out your head. But the Gemara is still proving before, the Mashal explains, the Gemara is still proving from the comparison from the kila to a house, that by a kila, in order for it to be similar to a house, it's if the kila has the minimum space of the height of 10 tfachim, then I say you can't stick out your head and say Kriya Shema.